This week is scraps week. So I have a scraps pile that was overflowing. It was starting to look more like a mountain and it was overwhelming me. So I decided to break out one of my trusty scraps projects. This one is probably my favorite for when I have a lot of scraps because it uses a large quantity of scraps, but it still uses little pieces. So the scraps could be like weird shaped or like a small amount of one type of fabric, but just like a lot. Anyway, basically it's a quilted tote bag. So I'm of course using towel scraps, but this project is very versatile to all types of fabric scraps. A lot of people are requesting more scraps projects because if you sew regularly, you know there are way too many scraps to be dealt with. So this one's a fun little cleanup project that then you can use all the time. So I cut out my squares. I'm just walking you through how I do it. Of course, there are a million different ways, but this is how I do my little quilted tote bags. So I start with a 4x4 square. So each square is 4 inches by 4 inches. And I cut out a bunch of them and make a pattern. In this case, I did different types of blue and made them into a 5x4 quilt. So when you're cutting out your squares, I stack them up by 2 because you'll need a front and a back of the tote bag. I usually cut out 2 of the same squares so that the front and the back are identical, but of course you can do anything you want depending on what you want the sides of your bag to look like. So this is a special little pattern that when I was little, my grandma, whenever she came to church with us, she would give us graph paper and coloring pencils, and she would show us how to find the middle of the paper, and then she'd start in the middle with a color, any color, and then you surround that square with a different color, and then you surround that square with those squares with a different color, and you keep going round and round until your whole page is covered. So that's why I did this pattern here, starting in the middle and working my way out with other colors. And then I am topping the bag with, so when I sew all of this, it's gonna get a lot shorter. So I'm topping it with a top border, and I'm putting a piece on the bottom. And this will connect to the other side as well. So just one of these and then 2 of these because front and back, and this one connects. And then I picked some strips of a matching color that will be the handles or the straps. So this is, if you can kind of see the vision. Now off to the sewing table. I'm going to switch over to a voiceover for the remainder of this video because I don't love talking to the camera while I'm doing a project. I like to zone in on the project that I'm working on. So, and also my camera / microphone setup is not the best. So this is probably much easier to hear, much nicer to listen to. So, to start off the quilted tote bag, you have to quilt all the squares together. So here I am doing that, and if you know how to quilt, you know that you sew all the squares together into rows first, and then you're going to sew all the rows together. Right now I'm sewing the front and the back side of the tote bag at the same time, so I'm just sewing identical rows of squares. And then that'll take care of my front and back of the tote at the same time. And then I'm just going to kind of zoom through this part right here because I don't think you need any more
guidance than this. You make all of your rows and then you sew all of the rows together. When you're sewing the rows together, just make sure that you're being very conscious about lining up your lines, lining up your seams, so that you end up with a very clean quilted look at the end and you don't have mismatched cross sections. Once I got all my squares sewn together into little mini quilts, I added the stripes that I wanted to add on the top and the bottom of the bag to add some extra length to the bag. Since I'm working with towel scraps, because that's what most of my sewing scraps are from because of my towel clothing company, my top strip of fabric is already hemmed since it's just the end of the towel. And I'll talk more about that later, but that'll just change a little bit of the way that I do things since it's pre-hemmed material. If you're using some upcycled material, you might also have a pre-hemmed edge, but that's not very common to be working with pre-hemmed fabric. So it will change a couple things, but not that much. The main structure of the bag is, the main assembly of the bag is the same. So I'm sewing on the top strips of the bag, and then I sew on the bottom strip as well. When I cut out my top and bottom strips for the bag, I did not cut them to exact size. I cut them a little bit extra long because I wasn't exactly sure how long my bag was going to be when I finished quilting all the squares together. So at this point, I need to cut them down to size so that they match the rest of the bag. So I just make all the lines flush and straight. And then I also waited to finish sewing, so that bottom strip is going to be sewn to my front and back part of the bag. It's attaching both sides of the bag at the bottom. So I only sewed it on the one side right now, and then once I cut it flush, then I will attach it to the other side to make sure that it all lines up properly. And now you will have your full outside shell. And the last thing I do before putting my bag all together is just trimming down these thick corners where the seams all line up, and trimming this down helps it just lay a little bit flatter, be a little softer and more flexible. Now that the fabric is all ready to go, it's time to make the actual bag. So I folded the fabric in on itself, right sides together, lining up those top hems. And then this is one of those parts where I'm going to be doing things differently because of the pre-hemmed fabric. To make it sew a little bit easier, I undo part of the stitching of the hem. I just go in a few inches, enough to kind of unfold it and sew the edge together. That way I can kind of re-hem that side seam and have it look flush with the rest of the already sewn hem. But yeah, again, you're probably not doing that part, and you can just go straight into sewing down the sides. And then it's time to make the lining. I'm using a white and gray pinstriped sheet. This sheet I have that I've just been using for like scrap fabric, pocket fabric, stuff like that. So I folded it in half so that the lining is on a fold, just like the bag. The bag is folded in half. So I laid the outside shell on top, and I just cut the lining to size, just tracing the outside shell. I also cut out a little pocket for the lining. I did an 8 by 11 inch rectangle. I wish I went a little bit bigger, maybe like 10 inch by 11 inches, just so that it's a little deeper. Then I pressed around the edges of the pocket. I pressed them in about 1/4 of an inch, and then I took that top edge of the pocket and I folded it down an additional inch so that it'll get a nice clean finish for that top hem. To position the pocket on the inside, I just centered it on the one side and tried to line up those pinstripes as much as possible while still keeping the pocket centered to the bag. And then to sew the pocket on, I followed around the edge I sewed about a half an inch on the inside, and then I turned around and followed the pocket on the very, very edge so that it's completely flush. And this lining is a little bit thinner of material than what I'm used to, so I should have switched up my needle, but oh well, too late now. And then sew down the side seams just like I did with the outside shell of the bag. And then one more structural detail that I am going to add to the bag is boxing the corners or squaring the corners. I don't know what that's really called, but I just opened the corner up like this, and I tried to line up that side seam with the bottom of the bag. I kind of pressed the bag so that I would be able to see that that crease, and sewed across it, diagonally sewed across a little triangle. I think the height of my triangle was about 2 to 3 inches, and then I just sewed as straight across as possible, making sure that I backstitched on the weak points like the edges and the seams. And then I actually sewed another seam right underneath it for extra strength and durability. And then I did the same thing to the corners of the exterior shell, giving it that same boxy shape. And I did the same exact length. So the height of the triangle was about 3 inches. I was sewing a straight line about 3 inches down from the corner of the triangle. I hope that makes sense. And then I cut off that excess corner fabric so that I don't have to deal with extra bulkiness of both the interior, the lining, and the exterior shell. And now we have all of our pieces of the puzzle. So the exterior tote with the boxed corners, and if you wanted to add anything extra to the outside, like I added this little logo patch, you're going to want to do that now before we put the lining in. And then we have the lining with the corners also boxed, and the 2 straps that we haven't finished up yet, but we're going to assemble them now. To sew the straps, I am working with a thicker fabric, and it's about 3 inches, maybe 2.5 inches wide. So I just folded it in on itself until both of the sides met each other in the middle. And I'm just doing a zigzag stitch straight down the middle so that it is sewing down both sides at the same time. I did widen my zigzag stitch so that it covers more ground, and I did shorten it, like condense it a little bit so that the zigzags are very tight to each other so that hopefully it stays a little bit better. So this is what it'll look like, just one zigzag stitch down the middle. And to make sure that it stays nicely, I'm doing a straight stitch down both sides as well. So at the end, it'll look like this: the zigzag in the middle and then 2 straight stitches just off to the side. To attach the straps to the bag, I make sure that the strap is facing out, and I line up the bottom about 1 inch underneath the hem of the bag. Oh, if you are working with fabric that is not pre-hemmed, you will want to hem it before this step. So I spaced the strap bottoms about 1 hand width apart, which is about 7 inches. And now I sew the strap on. You can't really see this because my hands are in the way, but basically just a lot of back stitching. I do the little box with the X in it, you know how you see most straps attached to most bags. Just making sure that it is as secure as possible. Now that one side of my strap is attached to the bag, I like to make sure that they're perfectly lined up and centered by folding the bag in half and kind of lining up those edge seams. And then I take the strap and fold it over to see where exactly it should go on the other side so that the bag would be exactly symmetrical. To attach the second strap, I did the exact same thing, making sure the right side was facing out and using the first strap as reference for where to place the second strap. Clipped it into place and then sewed it on the same way that I did the first one. So whatever way I want my bag to face, that's going to be the front of my bag. And I want the lining, the pocket, to be closest to my body. So when I'm holding the bag, I want the front facing out and I want the pocket to be on the inside back wall of the bag. So if I were to insert my lining in that direction, then it would look like this, which is exactly what I want. So I've seen people sew their lining by hemming this lining and then attaching it to the top. I think I will do that. I wasn't planning on attaching my lining this way, but it's much easier than what I was planning on doing. So when I cut out the lining, I didn't allow for a large seam allowance. So I just folded it over about 1/4 of an inch and I figured that'll still be close enough to the size that I needed. And once it was all hemmed, I stuck it into the exterior shell, lining up those corners of the squared corners, nice and aligned. And then it looks like it fits great. So that was exciting. I'm glad that worked out nicely. And to attach the lining to the bag, I just line up the side seams. I start at the side seam and work my way around, making sure that those side seams line up with each other. So this angle you can see a little bit better. I am sewing as close to the top of the lining as possible and making sure that that line stays straight all the way around the hem. And now I'm going to sew again on a little bit lower. I'm following the line that I originally sewed when I hemmed the lining. And that's just going to help everything stay put a little bit better. And the project is complete. So this is the lining with the bag. The other side of the lining is plain, or lining with the pocket. Other side of the lining is plain. You could of course add more pockets too, which is always fun. And then flipping it right side out. Also, side note, sometimes I do like to just like hand stitch the corners of the lining to the corners of the outside shell, just to keep it all together so that it doesn't like slide out when you're pulling things out of the bag. And here's the front. So cute. And you see the lining on the top, it turned out really like unnoticeable the way that I did it. So I'm definitely sticking to that strategy now. I can't believe I didn't do that before, but anyway, live and learn. So there is the quilted tote bag with lining. Have to take off all the little sewing strings that are sticking to it, but yeah, I'll show you some of the other ones that I made too if you want some more ideas of quilting patterns or color combos. This one was a fun little kind of stripe and checkered combo. This one, I started doing the same pattern of like start with one color and work your way out, but then I didn't have enough. Anyway, it's just kind of a combo of
3 colors, or 4 colors actually. That one was fun. This one was just a combo of all colors. I didn't repeat a single color. The front is the same as the back, but other than that, no repeats on one side. This one I had some stripes, some strips of leftover fabric, so I did this with a little checkered feature in the middle. And a classic checkered with bright blue and navy. So those are the ones I made this batch. I had a lot of scraps, but I hope you all find some inspo to use up your own scraps pile, to diminish your own scraps pile. Because when my scraps pile is diminished, my stress is diminished. So that's what I made this time. These bags in particular I will put on my website this weekend. But yeah, so stay tuned on my coastal website this weekend for these bags. And if you make your own, I would love to see it. So good luck.